Chelsea Davy just announced the birth of her third child on Mothering Sunday, and somewhere in a 13-bedroom house in California, I suspect that news landed rather harder than anyone is letting on. Little Finn arrived the week before Britain sat down to celebrate Mothering Sunday, and Chelsea, 40 years old, effortlessly glamorous, deeply private, and by all accounts genuinely content, shared the most beautiful photographs of her 3 children on Instagram with a message so quietly confident it made my heart do something funny. No drama, no grievance, no carefully staged lifestyle content designed to shift a product. Just a woman who has built an extraordinary life entirely on her own terms, holding her newborn son, flanked by her daughter Chloe and her son Leo, in a photograph that tells you everything you need to know about where she has landed. Now, I adore Chelsea Davy. I always have. There is something so thoroughly admirable about a woman who, at the height of the most intense public scrutiny imaginable, simply refused to play the game. She was hounded by the press during those years with Harry. She was followed, her phone was allegedly hacked, her movements were tracked, and she found the whole business, by her own account, frightfully overwhelming. And rather than weaponizing that experience, rather than booking an interview on Oprah or writing a memoir or launching a podcast called something like Finding My Truth, she quietly went back to Zimbabwe, studied law at Leeds, built a jewelry brand called Aya, started a luxury travel company, married a thoroughly decent hotelier called Sam Cutmore Scott in 2022, and got on with the business of living a life she actually wanted. Blimey, what a woman. The contrast with where Harry currently finds himself is so stark it is almost painful to contemplate. Sources close to the Duke have suggested, and this has now been widely reported, that the news of Chelsea's third baby has emotionally affected him. Not because there is any suggestion he pines for her, I want to be clear about that, but because it brings into very sharp focus the gap between the family life he once imagined for himself and the one he actually has. Harry and Chelsea, during those long on and off years, had apparently always talked about a big family, a house full of children, animals, open African skies, the kind of expansive life that suits a man who feels most himself in wide open spaces rather than in Hollywood boardrooms or Montecito sitting rooms. And then Meghan arrived, and 2 children became the ceiling, justified rather awkwardly on grounds of climate change, which even his most devoted supporters found a somewhat puzzling contribution to a conversation about one's own nursery. And here is the thing that Angela Levin, who knew Harry better than almost any journalist alive during the writing of his biography, has touched on with characteristic frankness. Chelsea was never dazzled by the palace. She was not wide-eyed about the titles or the footmen or the formal dinners. She genuinely did not care about any of it, and Harry loved her precisely because of that. She fitted into his world without trying to redesign it. She was warm, unpretentious, good fun, and completely herself. The Queen met her. She attended Peter Phillips's wedding. She was invited to the 60th birthday celebrations for King Charles. She was becoming part of the fabric, quietly and naturally, in the way these things work best. And then Harry, young and careless as only a young man can be, started behaving appallingly during her time at university in Leeds. And she, being a woman of considerable self-respect, eventually decided she had heard quite enough about it and left. Angela Levin is absolutely right that this is Harry's fault, not Chelsea's. 100%. You cannot treat a person that way and then spend years wondering wistfully where it all went wrong. That is not tragedy, that is consequence. It is the oldest lesson in the world, the kind your grandmother would have handed you over a cup of tea in the kitchen, and it does not require a Netflix documentary to understand. You reap what you sow, darling. And there is something else worth saying here, because it relates to what Angela Levin also revealed about Diana. There has been a rather convenient story circulating, pushed rather enthusiastically by Harry's allies, that Princess Diana privately called her younger son Good King Harry and was preparing him for the possibility that he, not William, might one day wear the crown. Richard Kay, the journalist who was one of Diana's closest confidants, said something of the sort in an interview this month, and the pro-Sussex press grabbed it and ran with it like a retriever with a particularly prized stick. But as Angela Levin rightly points out, the fuller picture is quite different. Diana took Harry to see a psychologist when he was a boy. She was worried about him. She was nursing a child who was, by all accounts, angry with the world from an early age. You do not take a future king to a therapist because he is sailing serenely through life. The Good King Harry nickname was a mother's kindness, a warm word of encouragement to a complicated boy she loved ferociously. To weaponize it as a constitutional argument in 2026 is, I am afraid, rather shabby. What I find genuinely interesting and rather revealing is the timing of all this landing alongside Tom Bower's new book, Betrayal, which has already set the Sussex communications operation into an absolute tizzy. The book, serialized this month in the Times, contains a claim that Queen Camilla privately told a friend, and I think this is rather extraordinary, that Meghan had brainwashed Harry. The couple's response was swift and scorching. Their spokesperson called it deranged conspiracy and melodrama, which is a rather spectacular phrase to deploy against a man who has spent a distinguished career investigating the powerful. Tom Bower, for his part, has responded by noting that the Variety magazine investigation into the Sussex Netflix relationship rather endorses everything he wrote. He is not wrong. But here is what strikes me most about the brainwashing claim, setting aside whether one agrees with the characterization. Queen Camilla is not a woman who speaks carelessly. She has operated within the most scrutinized family in the world for decades. She understands discretion the way a surgeon understands precision. The idea that she is simply inventing things in private conversation is, how shall I put this, rather hard to credit. Whether or not one agrees with the word she used, the underlying anxiety it reflects, that Harry has changed almost beyond recognition from the young man his family once knew, is something that people across the political spectrum have observed for years. And then there is the Windsor walkabout, which a Channel 5 documentary has just re-examined with the help of a professional lip reader. And honestly, darling, it is riveting and rather sad in equal measure. 2 days after the death of our beloved late Queen Elizabeth II, as the whole nation stood in stunned, grieving silence, those four royals walked together outside Windsor Castle in what the world understood to be a moment of unity. And underneath the surface, the lip reader tells us, William was asking Harry why they were even together. Harry replied that he had not foreseen this. And in the middle of it all, Princess Catherine said simply, "Stop arguing." There, in those 3 words from the most composed woman in British public life, is the whole sorry history of this rift, compressed into a single whispered instruction at the gates of Windsor. What strikes me about that moment is not the arguing, because, good gracious, 2 brothers who had not spoken properly in months being thrust together on television 2 days after their grandmother died was never going to be a picnic at Glyndebourne. What strikes me is Catherine. She is the one who tried to hold it together. She is the one who always tries to hold it together. And I think history will remember that rather clearly. And then there was Meghan's One Young World speech in Manchester in 2022, which Bower discusses in Betrayal, and which I want to address because it says something essential about who this woman is and has always always been. She stood before world leaders, humanitarians, prime ministers, and activists at a conference about global ethical leadership, and she spent the best part of 10 minutes talking about herself, her seat at the table, her feelings of doubt, her journey. The organisers were reportedly furious. One of them simply said, "She has effed it," using that precise word. And she had, because she took a platform that could have genuinely mattered and turned it into a monologue about her own ascent. The audience clapped politely, the organisers fumed quietly, and Bauer has preserved the moment in print for posterity, which is precisely what good biographers do. Compare that to Chelsea Davy on Mothering Sunday, doing something which actually required no platform at all. 3 photographs, a few simple lines, no performance, no brand activation, no carefully worded statement about empowerment. Just a woman thanking the world for her children with the quiet confidence of someone who never needed the world's approval in the first place. Finn, Chloe, and Leo, a jewellery brand built around her own name, a travel company rooted in the African landscape of her childhood, a husband who, by every available account, is absolutely lovely, a life that belongs entirely to her. Harry chose differently, and I genuinely believe he knew, even then, that he was choosing differently.
He knew what Chelsea represented and what he was giving up. Angela Levin believes Chelsea was the love of his life. And I think that is probably true in the way that first loves often are. Not because what came after cannot be real, but because the first person who loves you exactly as you are, without wanting anything from the position you occupy, tends to leave a particular kind of mark. I do not say any of this with unkindness toward Harry. I say it because I think he deserves honesty, rather than the relentless spin that currently surrounds his life. He is a young man who made choices and is now living with them in a quiet American suburb, reportedly adrift, with fewer friends than he once had, and a marriage that multiple serious journalists have now described as being in deep difficulty. He was once the nation's cheeky, beloved young prince, the lad who wore silly fancy dress and drove tanks and made us laugh and made us worry and made us proud all at once. That Harry is somewhere underneath all of this. I rather hope he finds his way back to himself. Chelsea Davy's little boy Finn arrived into a world where his mother has never sold a single piece of her story. She was photographed, followed, hacked, and harassed for years, and she came out the other side without a single tell-all interview, without a ghost-written book of grievances, without a podcast about healing. She just got on with it. And that, in 2026, might be the most quietly radical thing a woman in her position could possibly have done. Britain produced Chelsea Davy. That, I think, tells you rather a lot about us.